We have been receiving numerous complaints from the community around an area of Orange City. It used to be called CJ Nursery years ago. It's a 10-acre property. And they were complaining of, foul smells and drug dealing and, neighborhood thefts in the area. So we were eventually able to make 2 buys off the compound for meth. And then we served a search warrant there yesterday morning. Probably about 75 law enforcement and other personnel hit the property. We had the Department of Environmental Protection there, probation and parole, fish and wildlife, SWAT, narcotics, property detectives, and we encountered 27 people on this property. Some of the people were sleeping in pole barns, some were sleeping on the ground. You had vagrants, you had drug sellers and users, you had thieves. Some buildings didn't have power in them. And of the 27 people that we encountered, we were able to make 21 arrests so far. I think this is going to have a big hit and for the positive effect of the quality of life for the folks of Orange City. Because a lot of these folks, they're roaming in the middle of the night, they're pulling on car door handles, checking to see if a car door is open, stealing stuff off porches, stealing stuff out of stores. And like I said, this was a 10-acre compound, and the owner of the compound allowed this to flourish. That was, I think, the most frustrating thing for us. And 10 acres was a lot of territory to cover. We even had code enforcement out there, so the objective is to bring the owner of this property into compliance, because a neighbor told us a story that when they leave to go to dinner or food shopping or go to work, they shut their power off because they know somebody's going to come over from that campus, string an extension cord, and power up and charge cell phones, watch television, or do whatever.
Wow.
Could you imagine having to leave your house to go to work and kill the power because you don't want anybody stealing your power for 8 or 12 hours either way?
This will change the quality of life for lots of citizens in that city.
Our goal is that we believe for the immediate vicinity should see a huge impact, and some of the businesses start to see a residual impact as well. For when you look at retail theft inside of stores, they were cooking meth on the property. Granted, it wasn't a huge meth lab, but that's how they were doing enough to supply their habit there, which in and of itself can cause, you're in the woods, you're in a dry spell, and you have homes across the street. You could have a pretty big fire raging on that property.
You said there were complaints. How long did these complaints go on for?
Several months we had these complaints, and the narcotics guys and girls did a lot of work on it. They did a lot of legwork trying to get on that property. Just because something's going on a property, you need to develop probable cause to get in there, and they did. Once we got on there, we developed probable cause for a second search warrant for another property when we were there. So we're still sorting through everything. We expect more charges to be levied against some of the people we have in custody.
What's the next step for that property? I mean, is it going to be gutted out, cleared?
Well, now we have to go through with the Department of Environmental Protection. We have to go through with code enforcement and see what kind of fines could be brought into place to bring this property into compliance.
There was an interesting charge on there. I think one person was charged with littering, 500 pounds. Any idea?
That's what we had DEP there for. I learned it's something that, you bury a television in the ground, there's a huge amount of sanctions to go with that. So that's why we brought DEP in there with us, because there was a lot of things environmentally that were going on that property. We figure they wield a heavy stick. They can bring fines, they can force that property into being sold. There's a million things that they can do outside of what we do from the criminal end. Mostly the people on there were addicts, and the drugs that were there was to keep their habit going. They weren't selling, they weren't flooding Orange City with meth or heroin. There was enough there to satisfy the cravings of the addicts that were on scene.
Any words to these criminals that got away with it for that amount of time?
I would hate to think they got away with anything, because if you're sleeping on the ground under a pole barn, you're living in a house with no electricity, I just don't, and they're stealing to basically survive, for lack of a better term. I mean, this isn't a sophisticated operation where they're breaking into a business and stealing all the flat screen TVs and selling them for thousands and thousands of dollars. Everything that they're getting, they're selling just to buy their habit one more day. Where they're selling just to live is basically what it was. I mean, it was an encampment. It was a compound. I mean, that's the first thing I thought of when you walk on there was the Branch Davidian.
What about to someone that feels like they don't have another choice?
There are other choices. There's enough social service agencies out there, and you stress this enough. You got to want help to get help. If you want help to get better, the services are here. But if you don't want help and you don't want to get better, that's where you're going to end up at. You're going to end up living on a pole barn, with the the Volusia County Sheriff's Office coming in with a SWAT team and everybody else, and you're going to end up getting locked up. As I said, probation and parole was there because you had people who were on probation and parole who hadn't reported, who had warrants out for their arrest.
Weapons on the property or no?
There was one weapon that was stolen. We're trying to backtrack that weapon because we're kind of hopeful we may be able to figure out who stole it and then charge that person. The person who was in possession of it was an older gentleman, and we don't think he's the one that stole it. Based on the report, we have a pretty good idea who we think stole it, so we're going to try to go after that person because the person that stole it was a convicted felon. So that would up a charge. It would be a convicted felon in possession of a firearm.
And you mentioned, you touched on this, multiple tips were coming in about the conditions there,
Yeah,
I would imagine?
yeah. The neighbor. I mean, the big thing with the neighbors was, you live across the street from this thing. Beach chairs are stolen. A lot of things that people don't report, but they're quality of life issues. Your chairs are stolen off your porch. Your car was opened up, and the $3 of change was stolen. Your power's being stolen. Your water's being stolen. So all those things. Not to mention all the businesses around there that suffer retail theft.
And was there any one tip that caused this investigation to pick up more speed?
It was the years ago that we had been out there. So when the tips started coming in, the investigators had a pretty good idea of what was happening there again. It was a matter of building probable cause because it is private property. It is a gated, fenced-in compound, and you can't get on there without probable cause. In spite of all the complaints in the world, investigators have to develop probable cause to get a warrant to go on there. So.